The cool stuff to see on the moon is typically along the terminator of this shadow. So I had my telescope out a couple nights ago. And before I went out, I compared this illustration from Stellarium with the map behind me. So I was ready to kind of like look for certain features that are prominent along that terminator. So let's take a little tour of this terminator starting from the north and working our way down south. One of the first features you come to is this crater named after Plato from 400 BC. It's just very cool looking how flat it is, the way it's filled up with lava. If you could look at this closer, there are actually little pock marks on it, but that don't show up in my picture. So south of that is this big round area called the Sea of Rains. People saw these large areas that had filled with lava, and way back they thought they were like oceans. So this round area is surrounded by a group of mountain ranges named after different prominent mountain ranges on the earth. One in particular, the southern part, the Apennines, are some of the tallest mountain ranges on the moon, and they're also famous for several things. For example, this is the landing location for Apollo 15 at a place called Hadley Rill. Now, a rill is it's a crooked, snaky-like valley that are about a kilometer and a half across and maybe 300 meters deep. I have a picture of one. Like one of the firsts for Apollo 15 was to use a rover to explore. Another first was that the orbiter that didn't land carried a panoramic camera that swept back and forth to take pictures. And this is a contact sheet from that. It had a negative that was 45 inches long and 5 inches wide, and it would sweep across, and then as in time with the motion, it would take another picture and another picture and do a survey of the entire geography of the moon. So here's, for example, one of those rills. It just looks like a river valley, but they say it was actually from a lava tube underground that collapsed. And so that's where the name, the Hadley Rill, came from. Oh, just a side note, how I came across this thing. I had interviewed in 1973 at the company iTech in Lexington, Massachusetts, that made this camera. And I didn't get the job, but I did snag one of these contact prints. So what's kind of cool about this is a contact print off the actual negative that went to the moon. So this thing actually touched the thing that went to the moon. Also, looking down this mountain range, the Apennines, this mountain range here, named after Christian Huygens, I guess it's pronounced, is purported to be the highest mountain on the face of the moon. Huygens had, among other things he invented, one was an achromat eyepiece, where instead of one lens, he used two pieces of glass carefully designed to minimize chromatic aberration. He was also the pioneer that patented the escapement of a watch and a pendulum to keep very accurate time. Those clocks were the most accurate type of clocks for about 300 years after him. All right, coming down a little farther, just a little farther south at the very end of that Apennine range is this crater called named after Eratosthenes. He was the guy that in 200 BC very accurately measured the circumference of the Earth. Very clever that he set up a pole where where there's a zero shadow, so he knew that was the that angle, and then he walked some distance where there was a well where the sun shone straight down, and he was able to compare the angular difference to be 1 degree, and he took the walking distance and multiplied by 360, was able to compute very accurately the circumference of the Earth. All right, a little south from there is another famous Apollo landing site, Apollo 14, in this area named after a guy named Frau Mauro, I guess you say it. He was a cartographer in the 1400s that developed a very accurate map of the world for its time. Apollo 14, remember one of the things that was famous about is Alan Shepard hit a golf ball there. All right, coming down a little further, we're getting into the southern polar region of the moon. Oh, before we get down there, there's one other thing I want to show you up here. See this little tiny crack here? It's a thing called the straight wall. And unfortunately, I didn't get a good picture of the entire thing. But here's what it looks like in a NASA image. So my picture, so here's this little curved part, is this part, and you can see that crack in my picture is just this much of it, and it extends for about 110 kilometers. It's actually a fault line, not actually like a lava tube like the other rills. It shows up very well on day 8, the way the light is coming in at a very narrow angle in the shadow. Later in the lunar phases, when the sun shines in the other direction, you'd see it as a bright line as the light illuminates that cliff. They say it really isn't a sharp cliff. It's really only like a 10-degree slope, but in the shadows of harsh light of one way or the other, it looks like a cliff. Okay, a little farther south from there, there's some really rugged craters in this area called the highlands of the polar region. This is the most famous crater, named after Tycho Brahe. This crater is one that's unique. It's best viewed in a full moon because the stuff that's sprayed out of it is a lighter color. And you can see the ray lines from that thing that extends for about 1,500 kilometers. Anyway, Tycho Brahe was probably the last great astronomer before telescopes. There's the legend about him that he died because he wouldn't leave the king's banquet to take a pee because he thought it was socially unacceptable to leave before the king did. So he basically developed urinary retention, which is a very painful thing. Don't ask me how I know this. And he could have either broken a bladder or other things that would clog up the whole system. It's probably actually more sinister than that. He probably had something like prostate cancer that really caused his problem. But anyway, that's the legend of Tycho Brahe. This tiny little crater here has the name Hell. It's named after a Jesuit priest and astronomer. It seems like an unfortunate name for a Jesuit priest to have the name Hell. But he was a prominent astronomer in his day and was the director of the Vienna Observatory in the 1700s. Okay, moving on a little south here, this interesting crater named Clavius, named after Christopher Clavius, who lived in the 1500s. He was a contemporary of Galileo, also a Jesuit priest, and also a very prominent astronomer. The crater looks very cool because there's a series of little craters inside it in an arc of decreasing size. Just a very interesting pattern. So further down, we're getting to the very southern polar region, which is of interest to the Artemis mission coming up in 2027. Artemis 3 plans to visit this area. And why they're interested in it, these are some craters where the sun doesn't shine. And they believe that there's frozen water in those craters that might be of use for sustaining life at a future base that they might make on the moon. So that's pretty much my tour of the day 8 Terminator. And a couple other things. Well, I saw what I was under, but didn't get very good pictures. Saturn was interesting, was that at the point where the rings are the very thinnest. So you were viewing Saturn right on edge of the rings. I also saw Jupiter, and this again was a stellarium picture. I didn't get my picture. I should show you how I take pictures. I used my cell phone, just held it on the eyepiece, but I made a little jig here to help position my camera on the eyepiece. I just hold this on my camera with a rubber band, and then this little ring fits around the eyepiece and makes it a quick way to get it on and get it off and hold it flat and in position. So that's what I use to take these pictures. Anyway, thanks for joining me on the tour. Bye.